Hi, I'm Ben Richardson, and you're listening to the Karate Podcast, where we talk about karate, the competitive sport of Kumite, and the warrior's journey. Brought to you in association with Kumite Coach, the world's first progressive online high-definition coaching platform, created by coaches and fighters for coaches, fighters, and students of karate. Join kumitecoach.com today and take your karate to the next level. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Karate Podcast. I'm really excited to have with us Joby Wilson Sensei, who is a third degree black belt in karate. He has medaled internationally and nationally. He has competed all across the globe, from Japan to China to the US, Okinawa. He also holds a master's degree in sports rehabilitation therapy. He's a full-time coach in the sport of karate, as well as running a physical therapy practice, and also a part-time lecturer in sports rehabilitation therapy as well. So how he manages to be one of the UK's top fighters, we're going to find that out because it's a mystery to me. He's a fantastic fighter to watch, always attacking, always progressive. Before COVID, he was in the 10K Clash as well. So it's a real honor and pleasure to have Joby with us today. Thanks for being here, Joby.
Much.
So Joby, as always in the podcast, just like to find out how you found karate and how you progressed from.
It started with my mum's car breaking down. So we got shipped into one of our friends' cars, and they were off to a karate session, and I went along. I kept going, and he quit. And that was it. So I started when I was about 7, and never stopped since.
Nice. And what style of karate did you find?
We were originally a Wado club, but we switched to kind of more Shitoryu stuff because of the kata for competition, basically.
Yeah. And so when you started out in your training, were you practicing all aspects of karate, or did you immediately decide to focus on Kumite?
I was pretty terrible, to be honest. I didn't start competing in Kumite until after I got my black belt. So that was when I was 15, which for quite a number of competitors now is quite late.
Yeah.
So it's probably meant I've dragged out my competition career for quite a while after when other people might have stopped. But yeah, it was mainly the traditional side of things that I was focused on up until I got my downgrade, and then started competing shortly after that.
Was there a point when you realized that competition and Kumite was something that you wanted to invest yourself into?
Yeah, so I was doing some coaching in classes with some other instructors, and there were some younger students who were coming up who had been competing already, and I was starting to find it difficult to just match up with them in sparring. So I thought I'd chuck myself into a competition just to have a go and make sure that I could still stay on levels with them. And yeah, develop a bit more of a passion for it from there.
What was the experience? Do you remember going into your first competitions when you started out? Did that go to plan, or is being or something you've just worked hard at?
Yeah, my first competition was the EKF Nationals in, I don't know when it would have been, 2007 maybe. Yeah. And I got disqualified first round for contact, and I had my mum there who didn't really understand the rules and stood up from the crowd and shouted, "Get up, you puff." So yeah, completely not to plan. And then my second competition was what used to be the EKF Midlands comp, and I actually went into a lighter weight category, made the final, and lost to a lad who was currently the England badge holder for that weight. So it was much better after I kind of learned what I was meant to be doing rather than just whacking people.
And was there a difference in your mindset between those two competitions, or did you change the way you approached it?
think it was more just a better understanding of how it ran. I went to the first one not really knowing what to expect, not really knowing what I needed to do. Whereas the second one, I kind of was a little bit more settled as a result of having been there and done one before. So looking back on it, I should have probably started with something that wasn't a national championships and built up to that. But kind of throwing yourself in at the deep end is not always a bad shout, is it?
Not always. So who are the role models that you had at that time when you were moving into competition? Obviously, you'd worked towards your black belt, decided that you wanted to get into competing. Were there some strong role models present, and have any of those changed as you've moved forward through your career?
Yeah, I think they've constantly changed. With the more traditional side of it, obviously, my instructor, Sensei Paul Wood at the time, was probably that role model up until grade into Dan grade and led me through the traditional side of it. And then competitively, when I started getting into it, it was just whoever I was watching at the time. And there was always a number of athletes who watched back and they were kind of the typical names. But a major one for Kumite has got to be Biamonte. Just watching him fight, watching his range of techniques and the stuff he scored was just incredible. Yeah, I still watch some of the clips of his fights now. And then slightly later on, when everybody was focused on Agiev and watching him fight, I was probably watching Husanov, Azerbaijani. He's now one of the Azerbaijani coaches, just because he was my weight. And it was watching somebody compete at my weight category was a little bit more interesting to me.
Yeah, so you are from a competitive club. You've got a strong name in Kumite in the UK, but you've also become one of the top fighters around. And so, what do you feel are some of the things you've done maybe differently in order to reach those higher echelons?
I think just putting myself out there, and as you said, competing pretty extensively all over the place. Now I'm looking at a competition internationally probably every month, which takes its toll on the on juggling everything else, and it's difficult to do. But I think just being there and being in the mix and being in that setup, you just experience it, you see a bit more, and I think it's massively enhanced my coaching, just because you know what's working, you know what's scoring, you know what needs to be done to get people to that level and what's required to be worked on. I think that's been a huge part of it, alongside having the training partners the opportunity and the space to just train when they need to. It's not something that's obviously accessible for everybody, but we're running a session on Monday coming, and we've just opened it up to everybody as an opportunity for me to train and for everybody else to come along and train as well. And I think by the looks of it, we're going to have more than 10 England day squad members coming along for that session. So I think that the access to training partners in one space, in one room, has been a huge part of that progression, just by having the bodies to train with. So yeah, a bit of a combination of the two, but it's getting a bit manic with competitions at the moment.
Do you remember your first international, how that felt going away from UK to compete abroad?
I think my first international was in Dublin. And it was initially the excitement of traveling as a team and going to an event somewhere else. But I think it changes and it progresses as you go to more difficult competitions. So for some of the competitions recently, it's been on your own. You're traveling out to a competition abroad and there's nobody else with you. You haven't got a coach with you or anything at times. And I find that almost more demanding than going to my first competition. Having that big squad go out to an event feels very different to some of the bigger events that we're going to now.
I can empathize with that. When I started competing myself, I was the only person at my club. So it was a new club that was competing. I didn't know anyone. Then moving across the JKS, I suddenly became part of this big squad and found a lot of confidence just having people around you that were there to support forward.
Yeah.
How would you say your goal focus has changed as you've moved, from those first few competition days moving into the international scene?
Initially, I was just doing it for fun. It was more of a hobby, and now it doesn't sound great, but it doesn't feel like a hobby anymore. It's just something that I do, which in some ways is really good because it just becomes part of your normal routine. But in others, it doesn't feel like an escape all the time. It does feel like I'm going to train to work. It's not like it's a release and an escape from everything. But yeah, I don't necessarily think it's changed massively in terms of my goals. Goal is always to win regardless of what event you're going to. But I think the quality of events that I'm looking at going to has progressed instead.
With those bigger events, particularly the WKF international events, have you got a different mental approach to those, particularly when you're going by yourself? Do you have to change your expectation, or again, do you just stick to those goals? I want to win if I can at that tournament.
I think the expectation now is for rounds at those events. Obviously, it doesn't always go to plan. The worst one I had was flying all the way out to Chile for 3 minutes of fighting. Yeah, that one definitely didn't go to plan. But with some of the events, it's more so about the performance. Like, I recently came back from Vegas and fought pretty well. Just had a bad day arguing with some referees. I think that the goal is just to perform well, and it is a round at a time, and it always has been. It's whether or not you get through to the next round is just dependent upon the round that you're currently fighting in. So it's always been one round at a time, and win that round and move on.
How do you deal with loss at competition? If it hasn't gone your way, what do you do with that?
We analyze everything. So after Vegas, I sent the videos to my coach who wasn't there, and we were probably talking for a good couple of hours afterwards with just messages going backwards and forwards, analyzing every single point, every clash in that fight, what went well, what went wrong, critiquing my decision making, critiquing what they've done, and it's the analysis of it that just helps you move on to the next round. I've got a book, a little notebook that I thought was here, but it's not, that I take to competitions. And I started doing that when I went out to my first Series A event in Spain, and made a note, went through the videos of the fights, analysed them second by second, every clash, every point, everything, what went well, what went wrong, and then did the same thing a couple of weeks later in Austria and got through an extra 2 rounds. And I've just used that as a bit of analysis after every event that's helped to work out what is working and what needs work. And we go back to dojo and we work on it again. And it's just that constant cycle of revisiting every single point, every single fight, even to the extent of what did I do wrong in my warm-up? What did I not get right there? And there was one in Austria where I tweaked my hamstring in my warm-up. So what did I do? No, it was in Spain. I tweaked my hamstring in my warm-up. And then for Austria, I added some stuff into the warm-up that's going to mean that I don't do that the next time round. But it's just looking at every single little detail, I think, and that's what's led to that progression.
I think it's having a background in sports science that's influenced the way you approach your competition and your process.
Yeah, I think so. It's changed a lot of what I do, especially if you look at a traditional karateka approach to training, to warming up, to that side of things. I've completely changed what I do. It definitely helps with the injuries, and it helps to have a wife that can do the same. so I get when I get broken. But it's changed my approach to training. It's changed my approach to the performance side of it, and a lot of the management of the niggles and the pain and the injuries that occur have definitely been helped by the sports science and sports therapy degrees.
Is for the experience that you have, particularly in terms of your preparation for competition, like you're saying, you've got to warm up in a certain way, so you know you're going to perform your best at the event. Is that something that you instill in your students that you're coaching?
Yeah, I've really focused on changing how they're coached from what we did. And you can see it in a lot of sport, but I think it's more prevalent in karate and in traditional martial arts in general, that it's this is what I did, so this is what we do. And it follows that approach, which works for the traditional side of it, for the karate bit.
Yeah.
But I don't think it works for the performance aspect. So we've almost tried to eliminate some of that stuff and remove it from how we were coached. And I think it's definitely improving the performance of some of the athletes, but it's also making sure that they're not having the issues that we had. I mean, I don't want them getting to 18 and having a dodgy left hip like I did. And it's something you kind of carry with you, but it's something that was probably preventable if we were doing the right thing at that time. So I don't want them to be in the position that I'm in now. And I think it enhances the coaching practices that I implement and that hopefully others are implementing as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Going back to your own competing, has there been any moments in competition that have significantly then impacted on the way you're training or changed the way that you train?
That's a good question. Not necessarily in competing, but from training and from an injury, it almost helps quite a bit. So I dislocated my kneecap when I was coaching.
Sorry, it's probably my satellite internet that's
I'm not sure where I got.
crashed or something. Sorry, you were just saying that you dislocated your kneecap.
Yeah, so dislocated the kneecap and spent a bit of time in a splint afterwards, and then kind of rehabbing that knee. But in that time, I didn't trust standing on that leg, and I was already okay at kicking with my right leg.
Yeah.
But because when I was kicking with my right, I had to stand on the leg, I just didn't trust standing on it. So it made me really work on that left leg and massively improve my kicking ability on both. And I don't think there's too much of a difference between the two legs. Mm-hmm. So that probably was pretty advantageous. But in terms of in competition, I think it's the wins that you take that you're not expected to win that have the most benefit. So when you're fighting against somebody who people don't expect you to beat and you do, or fighting against somebody who you don't expect to beat and you do, and I'm not overly confident going into competitions like, oh, he looks good, or I'm not sure about fighting him. I did exactly the same thing out in Vegas recently, and the guy that I fought in my first round had a fight prior to that, and I watched him hit this American guy with a back kick to the face, and he's literally turned in and eaten this back kick, and I was like, I've got to fight him next. But so I was worried about that fight and build it up and build it up and build it up, and then when you beat them, you go through to the next round with a lot more confidence. And I think it's those almost the wins that you don't expect that have the most benefit, or the wins that other people don't expect that have the most benefit. And you mentioned the 10K earlier. I had, the first time I was on it, I fought Albert first round. And if you listen to the commentary on that, they didn't expect me to win. And it's always fun fighting out, but it's always painful because you get hit hard. So it's obviously a fight that is a little bit nerve-wracking. It's not going to go exactly how you expect. And I decided it'd be a good idea to try and sweep him at one point. Not the best decision I've ever made. But yeah, the wins that people don't expect you to take, I think, have the most benefit, the most carryover to the next round or next event.
Yeah. And in terms of going to those competitions, do you have a specific time frame that you and sort of method that you try and peak yourself, through in your training, so your optimum to go out to these events? Does it change as you approach competition?
Yeah, to some extent, but the frequency of the competitions can make that quite difficult at times. So as I said, we're looking at an international every month, and you can't peak all of them. So you don't necessarily get that same training load and training volume up to that point because of where the events fall. And we had, for example, going out to Vegas recently, we had the British on the Saturday, a national squad training session on the Sunday, and I flew out on the Wednesday. It was carnage. So amongst making weight for the British and then having a training session the next day and then making sure I'm still underweight for the Thursday the next week, it's tricky. And it's difficult to then manage that with a proper training camp, because whereas for an MMA fighter or a boxer, they're going to build up for that single event. Yeah, we've got that event and then another one the next week and another one the week after. Sure. So it's a challenge, but it allows you to almost modify the training and modulate it a little bit to fit around that. Yeah.
And do you support your training with any particular nutrition or physical therapy yourself?
Yeah, so especially when I am injured, normally try and recruit my wife to fix me. We've worked with a few strength conditioning coaches before and have a nutritionist who I'll go to if I have any questions or queries. The main thing that she worked on with me was actually sorting out my nutrition for the day, and she was discussing everything else that we could work on. But if I'm not getting the nutrition right on the day of the competition, then it was all a waste of time anyway. Yeah. So I think I nailed that now, and people see me turn up to competitions and training sessions with pills, potions, and powders that are just appearing from our bag in ridiculous quantities. But I think it has massively helped, especially my recovery between rounds, because it is so short at times. I think that was a big part of it. The bit that I do need to sort out is my head. So I've got a sports psychologist that I have spoken to in the past and should probably have another chat to. But
yeah. I know myself when I competed, getting my nutrition right on the day and finally sort of, picking that riddle made a massive difference just in terms of my own nerves, because I knew that was one thing that I could control and I didn't have to worry about that part of it. And also I did some work with a sports psychologist for a number of sessions, and again, massive impact, like literally flicking a switch on, overnight, approaching the next competition with a different mindset.
I think being from that from that background of that sports science side of things just allows you to be open to bringing other people in on that. And I think a lot of people do focus on the role of the sports coach, but the sports coach can't do everything and shouldn't be doing everything. It's that willingness to bring in somebody else to take on that role who is more professional and more experienced in that element. The sports psychology side of things is something that I definitely need to work on. As you said, getting the right nutrition for the day. Even what goes down well, what can I keep down, and what is going to manage nerves and food that I don't want to see again for the second time that day, is huge in the impact that it has.
Do you think it's still something that's underdeveloped for the majority of competitors, or do you think that's starting to improve?
I do think it's starting to improve. I would like to see it progress further. but depending on where you are and what your club in the country is doing, it can differ massively. So I can't really comment on everyone across the country because I don't know what is happening in-house and what's not. But it's definitely something that has been brought to the forefront a bit more in the last few years. And I think people are more aware of it more than anything else. And that awareness alone is enough to spark a little bit more interest in it. And even if you look at the athletes, when they get into 16, 17, 18, there is more of an interest in that sports science side of it just for their own personal development.
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to competition, what is your greatest achievement as a competitor in your own mind, regardless of what other people would list? What stands out as like, I was proud of that moment. I felt like all that effort was worth it.
See, I don't know. I mentioned to you before that I'm really good at messing up finals. So I've got too many silver medals and a lot fewer golds. There's a few events that stand out that have been good events, but there's some that just felt like they meant a bit more. One recently was the British University Championships, and not because it was an overly difficult or high level event, but because of what it then means you can go on to. So I won it in 2015 and got selected for the university team to go out to Montenegro, I believe, University Europeans. And that event never went ahead, so we didn't actually take a team. And that event was the only reason I did a master's degree, because I wanted to stay at uni for another year and I wanted to win it. So the year before I'd lost to an Azerbaijani international who was over studying. The year before that I'd lost to Carlos, who was on the Spanish national team. And the year before that I dislocated my kneecap, so I wasn't able to do it. So I did a master's degree just to win that, which sounds ridiculous, especially the cost of a master's degree. And then, so got selected, it was all going to go ahead and never ended up happening. And it just felt like it was a little bit of something that had been left, not quite finished, and that I had to go back and do. So from the qualification they're currently making me do at the university, I was a student again. So I put an entry in for Bucks and won it, and we're going to the University Europeans in Poland in July. So it feels like it's a bit of unfinished business that I'm finally getting to do. Yeah. And it might not look like a big deal from the outside, but for me, this is 7 years late. So yeah, I think that one.
That's fantastic, Joby. That's a fantastic story. Do you have any achievements as a coach that stand out to you that would be different from that as a competitor?
I think for me, my competitors are only really just getting started. I've got a couple who have been going for a little longer. Mm-hmm. But my competitors, of them, I've got one who took a silver at the Nationals. I don't know when it was. It would have been before COVID, so however many years ago that was. And that was great. It's such a big achievement for her, and in the most selfish way possible, quite a big achievement for me as well to have an athlete who was able to go and produce that sort of performance. Yeah. We've since started looking at taking her to internationals. She came out to Berlin for one. And I think just seeing that progression, I was chatting to her dad at a competition on Sunday, and he was saying how he remembers the first couple of years of her competing. It was just first or second round, getting through a couple of competitions where there was no medal, there was not even in touch of the medals, and just seeing that development to winning medals at these events and just being more comfortable, more confident at those events to know that she's in with a shot. Yeah. And that's quite a nice feeling.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Do you have any advice to young competitors who are looking to move up to maybe the EKF squad, or even looking to move into international competition, have dreams of being WKF world champion? What advice would you give them?
Just to keep going, because I spent a good few years just losing first round and going to competitions and not even scoring a point. And it does come, but you have to put yourself in a situation to test that. And if you're not sparring or training with the right people, if you're not having that exposure to the right bodies in training, you don't get that opportunity. So you have to take yourself to a position where those people are there. And I think something that I've done throughout when I've been competing is almost drag somebody with me. So we've had somebody that I'm throwing in the car and we're going training there, and we'll just dart around all over the place. Yeah. But it's beneficial to have somebody who can be that body for you and somebody who you can constantly train with, especially if you're both on that same journey. And then in terms of the internationals, I think you've got to go and do one. There's smaller international events that you can go to, but you have to have that exposure to them. If you go to those competitions, you'll see the difference in level and the difference in all of it, the difference in the referee and the difference in the contact that they're allowing, the difference in how they fight. And just that exposure to more variety is going to ultimately bring you on. Yeah. So just put yourself in front of it as much as you can.
Yeah. What do you think are the differences in the sort of, I guess, level of performance of some of the other countries like Azerbaijan, like Turkey, Japan, that are producing a number of high-level competitors? I think the UK is starting to produce and push out more top-level competitors, or contenders at least, than maybe previously. But do you have an understanding of, in your own mind, of any differences in their approach to karate training competition that is currently giving them that different edge?
Not massively. I think a lot of people will try and bring that back to the fact that a lot of them have full-time teams and squads, and it is their job. But the fact that we're able to hold our own with them when we're not in that situation just shows that it can be done. Yeah. And I think if people start believing that and actually are being exposed to that type of environment, it will happen. There is people who from the UK who have done it, so it is doable. But I think those that have done it have been the ones that have exposed themselves as much as possible. They've been at all of these international events. They've been at those training camps. They're training with those other people. Yeah. It's just making sure that everybody understands that's the extent that you've got to go to. And because it's not a professional sport, people almost don't give it that professional attitude and think that they can get by with doing their training sessions here and there and then going to those events and medaling. But if you look at what's required from the athletes who are regularly medaling, the countries who are regularly producing people, that's not what they're doing. And it's not going to replicate what has to be done unless we can be at those events with them. And it is a huge commitment to do it. But if people want to do it, then that's the way.
Yeah. I agree fully. So last question, what are your goals for 2022 in karate?
I've got a couple of unusual ones. So I want to take a medal from the University Europeans in Poland. That's the big one. And I think that'll be tough. So there's some work to be done there. And then one of my major ones, I really want to compete on every continent. I don't know why. But,
yeah. How many have you done so far?
So I'm missing Antarctica, but I don't think I'm going to get a comp in there. So we'll leave that one off the list.
You just have to take a friend and have a match.
Spray it in red and blue on the snow.
Yeah.
So I need to tick off Africa and I need to tick off Oceania.
Okay.
So that one's going to be a little bit more tricky. If I can juggle everything around, I might be able to get out of Cairo, so I can get the Africa one ticked off. But yeah, they're the two that are in my head. So if you hear of any competitions happening in Auckland, then let me know.
Yeah. Well, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you, Joby. I appreciate your time. I mean, super busy running all those businesses and having all those commitments. So I do appreciate you being here. And you've got a fantastic facility in Banbury in Oxfordshire. I'm looking at it now. It is a total beast of a facility. And Joby is holding an open training session next Monday. Yeah, Monday coming.
Yeah, the second.
So the door is open to Joby's dojo, and you could just learn so much. So I thoroughly recommend a visit to Banbury if you're in the area or you just want to improve your karate skills. Joby, thanks very much.
Thank you.